situations will work out in a certain way. Attachment to outcomes can cause me to feel anxious and rob me of my peace. I settled my mind by going within and remembering the infinite power of God. I breathe deeply and feel peaceful as I surrender my desires in prayer. I affirm, peace is mine and all is well. Free of my attachments, inner peace and calm return to my mind and heart. And today's reading is from Philippians 4:9. Keep on doing the things that you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, and the God of peace will be with you.
Thank you, Tom. Inner peace. Oh, it's a message I need to enter into a moment of meditation. And as we do, we can think about the quickest way to inner peace, which is through forgiveness. Since our music folks are off today, this will be slightly different. I'm going to do a brief reading that will lead us into meditation, and then I will ring this singing bowl next to me to start a moment of silence that we will share together. And when we're finished with that, I'll ring the bowl again. So wherever you are, just center yourself, close your eyes if you feel so guided to. Get comfortable. I want to read for you the Buddhist prayer of forgiveness. And if there's any situation in your life that you feel might need to be forgiven, hold that gently in your spirit. If I have harmed anyone in any way, either knowingly or unknowingly, through my own confusions, I ask their forgiveness. If anyone has harmed me in any way, either knowingly or unknowingly, through their own confusions, I forgive them. And if there is a situation that I am not yet ready to forgive, I forgive myself for that. For all the ways that I harm myself, negate, doubt, belittle myself, judge, or be unkind to myself through my own confusions, I forgive myself. And I want you to pretend that that was an entire song right there with singers, a piano. That recording of Jamie, was that like awesome? You know what I heard? I heard Kenny Malone. I heard that drum. I heard Kenny Malone. I heard, of course, Judy playing the keyboard on that. And so that was a wonderful little walk down memory lane, if you will. I sent Judy and Jamie a private message on Facebook this week, and I said, do y'all mind if we do this song, if we do this recording? Judy, of course, said, that's fine, go right ahead. Jamie said, oh, yeah, that's fine. Maybe I'll just pop on in. I'm in town this weekend. So I want every one of you to get on Facebook and give her a hard time for not being here later on, okay? No, not really. So the holy season is over, right? The betrayal, the crucifixion, the resurrection, Fat Tuesday, Mardi Gras, Ash Wednesday, Peter's denial, Judas' betrayal, the whole thing, the whole ball of wax. It's all over. The holy season is over. Or is it? Right? So one of the central parts of the story of Jesus that we didn't talk about a whole lot in the churches I grew up in was the ascension. Now, we talked about the ascension, but we didn't recognize the day. I think in some much more Orthodox churches, they recognize the Feast of the Ascension or something like that. We didn't. We didn't talk about it all that much. But sure enough, after 40 days, he resurrected. 40 days he spent here on earth appearing to the disciples, including Mary Magdalene and some of the other followers of Jesus that weren't in the Big 12 that we always talked about, right? There's not a whole lot written about the ascension, but it's in all four Gospels. And there's some things that aren't mentioned in all four Gospels, so that in and of itself is pretty big. It's also mentioned in some other Gospels, right? Most of us know that in 1945, there were some other texts that were discovered at Nag Hammadi, Egypt. They're sometimes called the Gnostic Gospels or the Nag Hammadi Gospels. And because of that discovery and many others like it, more has been discovered about Christianity in the last 75 years than 1,000 years preceding it. We're learning more all the time about some of these writings. And these, of course, include the Gospels of Mary and Thomas and Judas and some others that we're maybe familiar with. That happens to be a picture of the copy that I have. It's edited by Marvin Meyer. If you ever wanted to pick up a copy of the Gnostic Gospels, I really recommend that one right there. So these texts were either not known to or completely ignored by the church leaders that met at the Nicene Council in the 4th century, right? 325 AD or CE, whichever way you want to talk about it, 325 years after the beginning of our modern calendar. Some of the church leaders gathered together at what you might call a religious kind of Build-A-Bear workshop, right? So they all came together and they said, okay, how do we actually form what this religion is? And they made decisions like when our holidays would be, books would be in them. And so they canonized these certain books, but there were some that they left out, and I kind of wonder why. Because some of those other books actually align Christianity a lot more with some of the other great world religions, like Hinduism and Buddhism, and Islam wasn't around yet, but some of the earlier, more ancient thought systems. So we're actually, as Christians, those of us who came from a Christian history or heritage, much more alike than we are different from some of our other spiritual friends around the world. One of the books in the Nag Hammadi Gospels is the Apocalypse of James. And in this book, Jesus tells James, free yourself from this blind idea that you are merely the case of flesh which encircles you. Then you will reach him who is. Then you will no longer be James. Rather, you are the one who is. Whew. It gets better than that. In the dialogue of the Savior, another Nag Hammadi text, the disciples ask Jesus, who is the one who seeks and who is the one who reveals? And Jesus says, the one who seeks is the one who reveals. That for which you are seeking is within you. And then Jesus did a mic drop and exited stage left. That is pure mysticism. That is pure Hinduism. That is pure Buddhism. That is pure Muji. That is pure many of the other teachers. That is pure New Thought. That is pure unity. right there. So now, in light of this understanding of Jesus, and we know what Jesus did for these 40 days afterwards, and we know the kinds of teaching that he was giving to the disciples, that leaves us with this question that we asked at the beginning, and that is, what do we do about the Romans? It's all well and good to be told to go out and preach the gospel or tell the good news to other people, but what do we do about the Romans? So the Romans were the power structure, right? They were the system. They were the man. And in order to protect the system, which is often what the system does, the system acts to protect the system, right? In order to protect the system, a somewhat reluctant Pontius Pilate said to an angry, he said, I'm not getting involved. I'm going to wash my hands of this. Do what you will. And in that way, the Roman government put the decision into the hands of the Roman people. And they screamed, crucify him. Now, present at this trial and present at the crucifixion were both followers and detractors. There were disciples and there were Pharisees. There were monotheists and there were polytheists. There were Christians and Jews and followers of the Roman pagan tradition, by far the largest group that was there. Present at the trial were Republicans and Democrats, Tea Partiers and feminists, states' writers and civil writers, Second Amendment followers and gun regulation supporters, pro-life and pro-choice. They were all there. It was a mix, just like we have a mix today in our society. And everybody, this is important, everybody was doing what they believed was right. Everybody was doing what they believed was right. The Romans who killed Jesus and the followers who loved Jesus didn't just go off to separate corners after he died. People don't just go off to separate corners after an election, after a crucifixion. They had to live with each other. They had to move forward. Romans didn't suddenly become Christians. Christians didn't suddenly just give up, although they almost did. They almost did. They could have, but then Jesus appeared to them. And that's exactly the way that it's written in the scriptures, is that Jesus just kind of magically appeared on several occasions. Just, whoop, there he is. Whoop, there he is. Whoop, there he is. And you thought there wasn't going to be a lot of music in this service. Sometimes they didn't recognize him at first. Right? Sometimes they did. Sometimes they had to have it proven to them, like Thomas, right? Doubting Thomas. But Jesus came and appeared to them, and he gave instructions to the disciples. He told them to share the good news of this way of life. This way of knowing that I am not the flesh that encompasses me, rather that I am the who is that is, and that I am. That is the good news that he wanted shared. He told them to wait, right? Remember that? He told them to wait until the Holy Spirit came and gave them what they needed to do this work. But there's no record of him telling them what to do about the Romans. Right? And that in and of itself is a metaphysical message. There could be a message there that maybe you just ignore them. You just go on and do what you are here to do and don't pay any attention to anybody else. Right? That could be part of the message. Many people have discovered in the past few years hidden Romans in their lives. People maybe you didn't know were the Romans in your life. Maybe we're the Romans. I can't say. But in some way, perhaps, there is someone in your life with whom you once shared something beautiful, and that feels as if it has been crucified. That feels as if it has been sacrificed on some kind of altar. I read an article in the Atlantic magazine the other day that said that most people who have experienced a rift in a relationship because of the Trump era, most of those people are indicating that they are not ready to repair that relationship. It doesn't matter that there has been an election. It doesn't matter that some of the intensity has seemed to pass by. It doesn't matter that, if nothing else, we're just breathing and ignoring it right now because we're exhausted. It doesn't matter that Biden is president and wants to unite us. He can't. Only we can do that. And for the most part, we're not ready. So how do we get beyond it? How do we repair something that feels like a crucifixion? Are there unforgivable infractions? And if we forgive the unforgivable, are we causing damage to our own core that relies on an adherence to our principles? You know that dance I'm talking about, don't you? So I haven't talked about this in great detail. I think I've mentioned it. But I'm going to tell you a little story about something that the lasting gift that the last 4 years gave to my family. And that was the creation of a divide between me and my younger sister that many times feels irreparable. It started with a difference of opinions about the coronavirus. Nikki and I took this very seriously. We believed the science, we listened to the news, we followed the direction of the CDC. We did our best to act in ways that would protect us and protect others. My sister believed that it was an overblown hoax designed to take away her individual liberties. Now, we both kind of knew this about each other from a distance, and because we live a few states away from each other, it was okay. We could kind of navigate those waters because we were far apart and we didn't really have to talk much. But the truth is, we had rarely disagreed about anything in our lives. We had similar spiritual beliefs, equality. We had similar progressive ideas about society. If 2 years ago, if you'd have asked me, do you know anyone in your life more liberal than you are? I would have said my little sister. Right? That would have been the person. We really had never been tested in this regard because we'd always aligned. There'd never been an opportunity for us to differ. So when Nikki and I were hardly leaving our house, not eating out in restaurants, getting groceries delivered, keeping Amazon real busy, spraying Lysol on packages before we brought them in the house, my sister's husband was marching through Home Depot, videoing himself maskless and talking about all the sheeple around him. I know because he boldly posted that on social media. And it just got bigger and bigger and bigger. So then when my sister began to post things on social media that were anti-CDC or the rantings of this or that conspiracy theory, I was at first speechless. Because for any one of us, these sides, these lines we draw, these sides we align with, they represent much more to each of us than just one issue, right? They represent a lot of stuff. And for me, this represented a lot of stuff, far beyond a pandemic. So at first, I responded because, I have a hard time just letting things sit there. Damn it. And at first I responded with, "You're breaking my heart." That's all I wrote. "You're breaking my heart." And then there was a time or two, very rarely, when I said just a little bit more, but I said as little as I possibly could because A, that's not the forum, and B, I can get on there and say whatever I want to say, but I'm not going to entangle, right? So I didn't want to say much, but I also needed to retain my ability to sleep at night. And so I said what little I could. In October of last year, obviously the way that I thought I was communicating and the way that she was perceiving it were two very different things, which is often the way those things go, isn't it? So in October of last year, I got a message from my sister that said, I need a break from you. Now that one hit me right here, because after 50 years of being sisters, I'd never heard that, never thought I would hear it. I need a break from you. It said other things as well, but that was her thesis statement. And that's not, I went silent. I didn't know what to do except to honor her request. If you need a break from me, I'm going to give you that space. And absolutely, let's all just back up. And I went silent. As Christmas approached, I had not heard from her. So I made the decision to not go home to Missouri. Both my sisters and my mom live in southwest Missouri. And I made the decision to not go home. I can count on one hand the number of times I have not been with my mother on Christmas in now 57 years of living. And this past one was one of them. But I was still honoring my little sister's request. And I didn't want to put my mother and my other sister's position. It wasn't their fault. They didn't deserve to have to run interference. So I didn't go home. Now, as Christmas Day approached, I was thinking about sending my sister a message. And I thought about what message I wanted to send. And I thought, maybe I'll just send, hey, hope you're going to have a nice Christmas, miss you, hope you're well. Right? Really benign little message. And before I got around to sending it, she sent me a message. And it said, all I want for Christmas is for you to watch this video. Inner peace, inner peace, inner peace. So I did. Because I generally make it a practice of doing what my sisters ask me to do. And it was 18 minutes, 18 of the longest minutes of my life, of unsubstantiated, baseless untruths and flat-out lies. It was about the pandemic, but it was also about how the election was stolen, and it was all rigged, and it's all a lie, and we're being run by some kind of deep state, and somebody's, pedophilia, and this and this and this. After it was over, like a good English professor, I went looking for anything online about the man who had produced it. Let's look at the credentials. Let's look at where you're coming from. The only thing I could find about this guy was one old random and untended LinkedIn account that was put up about 10 years ago, right? So there was nothing. But you might want to know this as well. In her message were these words: this is more important than Black Lives Matter or LGBTQ equality issues. This is getting tougher and tougher for me. From my place of being, my sister had just discounted some really important parts of my life, core parts of my life. In addition, she had discounted my 24-year career teaching information literacy and validating sources and making sure things were credible. It felt deep, and it felt personal, and it felt insurmountable. I didn't send my message. I just backed away again. I had never been in a place like this before. I had never experienced a situation where I literally had no idea what to do. I was paralyzed. Just pretending none of this had happened was not acceptable. I had been on Calvary. In my experience, I'd been there for the crucifixion. It was real. I saw the blood. I knew who the Romans were. And how do you forgive that? How do you say, oh yeah, that crucifixion thing, that's yesterday's news. How are you doing? Right? You just can't slide beyond some of those things. So I was stuck, absolutely stuck in that spot for a long time. I hurt so deeply inside. I felt torn between my infinite love for my sister and my absolute devotion to the integrity of my beingness. And that is not an easy place to be in. And then I heard the gospel according to Dolly. I was spending spring break staining our fence. To pass the time, I was listening to podcasts, because that is probably the single most boring job in the history of boring jobs. And I was listening to podcasts, so I'd listened to a couple of them in a row, and I was trying to look for another one, and then I remembered how much people had praised and talked about this podcast called Dolly Parton's America, right? Dolly Parton. Is there any other place in our cultural land where all of us can be the center of our entire vortex? Right? Republicans, Democrats, right, left, Christians, Jews, it doesn't matter. We all love Dolly. Dolly is the best. And here's the thing, I really think that's what she came here to do. I don't think Dolly came here to sing and perform and act. I think she came here to build bridges, because that's what she is. She's a bridge builder. In this podcast, the host asked her about Porter Wagoner, her early years. You remember, she was, most of us are old enough to remember, that Dolly got her start as Porter Wagoner's girl singer, right? And they hit a little bit of rough spot. He was trying to control her. She was ready to fly free. She went out, famously wrote the song, "I Will Always Love You," about this, probably made more money off of that song about her situation with Porter Wagoner than he made in his entire life. He sued her. It was ugly. Years later, he was in financial trouble. His star had faded. Hers was huge. He was in financial trouble, and so he had to put his production company up for sale. And Dolly came along and bought it for several $1,000,000 and then turned around and gifted it back to him. And in the podcast, she said, I just thought, in her Dolly way, it just seemed like a really good way to say thank you. So in this process, the host asked her, he said, how did you do this? How would you find it possible? I mean, could you really forgive him for the way that he tried to control your life? And Dolly said, without hesitation, it was the quickest answer she gave to anything in that entire podcast. She said, honey, forgiveness is everything. I put my paintbrush down, I sat down in the grass, and I started sobbing. Forgiveness is everything. A few weeks later, I got the gospel according to Tina Turner. So Nikki and I were watching the Tina Turner documentary on HBO Max. If you haven't seen it, it's really good. I recommend it. It just came out not too long ago. She's been someone I've admired for a long time, not just for her rock star status, but also for her spiritual evolution into Buddhism. And in the documentary, she talked about how many times people would ask her about Ike. Right? She'd sit down and do an interview. The first thing they want to know is about Ike. And she kept talking about how she just wanted to forgive and move forward. Just move beyond all of that. She got to the point where when they'd ask her, she'd just say, I hope he has his heart's desire and everything is going well in his world. That's all I have to say. In the documentary, I'd been reminded of the work that Tina Turner had done with the Beyond Project. And so it's this project that she did with Regula Kurti and Dechen Shakdagse, where they recorded Christian and Buddhist prayers and chanting. You can go to beyond-foundation.org, click on music production. I think they've put out 3 or 4 albums now. It's beautiful. And of course, in that album, you have Tina Turner doing a lot of chanting. She considers herself a Buddhist Baptist because she said, I'll never quite get beyond my raising. After the documentary, I laid in bed that night listening. I had been reminded about this recording, and I was listening to some of the Beyond album. And I was listening to Tina. At one point, she's talking over the music, and she's talking about moving beyond resentment, beyond misunderstanding, and then chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo mantra, the Lotus Sutra mantra that is the path to Buddhist enlightenment. And to hear her talk about the unity and the oneness in all of us and how we must move beyond in order to see it. So as she was talking about moving beyond, of course, I heard in my spirit the words of Rumi, right? The third problem, ideas of wrongdoing and right doing. There is a field. I'll meet you there. And that actually belongs to a much larger poem called A Great Wagon. I'm not going to read you the whole poem, but I do want to read the middle section to you. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. The breeze at dawn has secrets to tell you. Don't go back to sleep. You must ask for what you really want. Don't go back to sleep. People are going back and forth across the doorsill where the two worlds touch. The door is round and open. Don't go back to sleep. Like angels balancing on the head of a pen, like the laser point of where that sweet spot lies. This journey of spiritual growth and awakening is like that. It's the hardest, easiest thing I've ever had to do. How do we stay awake, not go back to sleep, but insist once again on going back out to the field of endless forgiveness, the field beyond the need for forgiveness? From the cross, Jesus begged, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. Love pours in, and grace takes the place of judgment when I'm able to say, Spirit, forgive her. She knows not what she does. But my friends, the ego collapses, and the divine I am that I am rises like a lotus from the mud when I am able to say, Spirit, forgive me. I don't know what I'm doing. My mind wants to make sure that I don't forget the crucifixion, but my spirit wants to live in resurrection. In the 24th chapter of Luke, when the women come and they find the tomb empty, the angels who meet them there say this, why are you looking for the living one in a cemetery? So why are we looking for hope and reconciliation in the land of conflict? We won't find it there. We aren't going to find the field of unity as long as we are in the ideas of right doing and wrong doing. Is there still right doing and wrong doing? Well, in my little head, yes. That's why the sweet spot is so elusive. In this physical body, I'm going to stand for what I believe is right. But in this spirit, I'm going to live as much as I can in the field beyond. How do I say, let's move to where none of this matters when some of this really matters? As the hurt and the perceptions and the evolution and the messages of forgiveness all roiled around in me, I continued to feel at a loss for what I should do. I was compelled to reach out to my little sister in some sort of way, but what would I say? I knew that whatever I said had to be said with no defense and no pretense. I knew that explaining my position was like seeking reconciliation in the land of conflict. It wasn't going to happen. How could I only say what might be said from that field? It was the hardest piece of writing I've ever done. But a few weeks ago, I sent her an email, and I said, one sentence, I just want to make sure you know I love you. That's it. Now, I would love to put a nice little bow on this and tell you that everything worked out great and they lived happily ever after. But here's what I learned. She didn't respond to me for a few weeks, and then she did, oddly enough, on my birthday. She responded to work through the hurt. Here's one of the things I know. Sometimes we will be ready to move to the field of forgiveness, and others will not be ready. They're not ready yet, and we have to be ready for that. It got pretty toxic and ugly this week. And I tried with everything within me to just stay in that field. At one point, she mocked me for that. And I had to just let it go. Just let it go. Let her go. I had to draw my own little boundaries and say, this is what I will accept, this is what I will not. Go with God. But I feel free. I feel free. Because I'm in that field and I plan to stay there as often as I can. I don't need her to be wrong. I don't need her to be right. But I now know that forgiveness is another word for freedom. If she says something that violates my principles, then I'll stand up for my principles again. And maybe this dance will continue. I don't know. But this dance, if it's going to continue, will do so with at least one party free. And always, always trying to move the conversation out of my life. It is the work of this journey to move beyond. Beyond. Om. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Namaste.
Okay, let's say the prayer for abundance. I am open to receiving floods of financial abundance with ease so that I may be able to give back even more to the world around me. And our prayer for protection. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. The presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well.
We are messengers of love. joy.